Hi, my name is Roy Collin and welcome to the show. I've also got five podcasts: The Awakening Podcast, exposing fraud and corruption, but with solutions; the Crypto Podcast, talking about all things blockchain, NFTs, crypto; the Meditation Podcast, talking about all different types of meditation, but there's also meditations there from 1 minute to 2 hours. And the other one's the Learn Polish Podcast. So if you're interested in learning Polish, you can do that. And the other one is Speaking with Roy Collin. And I just have guests from around the world talking about either public speaking or also about their book or just general life in general. And you'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster. I'm also a podcasting coach. And you see the QR code there, and it's also on my link as well. And if you're interested in actually going on some podcast shows, I'm helping people doing that. Or if you're interested in sponsorship, you can contact me. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, DanielPacker.com. He helps people with anxiety, stress, and addictions. He's got a 90% success rate, and you only pay if you're successful. So be sure to check him out, DanielPacker.com. I hope you enjoy this week's show. Welcome to the Crypto Podcast. You can find all our episodes on cryptopodcast.org. My guest today, from Tampa, Florida, AWS 8 times certified, senior cloud strategist, AWS community builder, blockchain enthusiast, and what I love, obviously, is a fellow podcaster. He's the host of Tech Travels podcast. His career include working for Amazon, Google, Microsoft, as well as others. Please welcome Stephen Woodard.
Thank you, Roy. Good to be here with you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem at all. And I've listened to some of the shows, so I know it's kind of this year that you started with your podcast. So I suppose let's start off with that. Let's say why you decided to get going with a podcast and what exactly you're covering on your show.
Yeah, I think the idea of me just starting a podcast was, as I was engaging with CEOs and executives across the IT industry, talking about AI, blockchain, Web3, it really occurred to me that there's a lot of conversations out there that most people aren't hearing. So what I thought about with the podcast was, a lot of the discussions I have with those personas across IT and the amazing things that are on the horizon is, why not start a podcast? Let people come on, talk about the things that they're truly passionate about, and talk about them in a very non-technical way. Most times people get caught up in the technical jargon and they can't understand, they can't follow because they're not specifically in that. My aim in the podcast was really to have folks on that really kind of tell a story that includes things like talk about your journey. How did you become CEO? Or how do you talk about this when you're talking with other customers around AI, around Web3, blockchain, and talk about them in a way that's giving a listener a chance to hear them in a way that they can easily digest and consume the information, and just really kind of tell a good story around it as well too. Some things that people may not know about the technology and its potential impact and how they can get involved or how it's going to change for them. So that's been kind of the genesis around starting the podcast, was just to kind of tell a great story that doesn't really speak too much technical jargon. And yeah, that's why I started it.
Excellent. And I mean, the same with mine. Mine was like, I read a load of books on crypto and I was like, I don't understand this at all. And it landed on my lap at, Bitcoin. There was somebody trying to give it to me at one stage, 2014. And I was like, I don't get this, wallets now. And it's like the same with the Ethereum. And it was like trying to simplify it. And it's just because I don't have a technical background, then my questions then is allowing all types of listeners. And what's strange is there is even technical people or people that are heavily involved in this. And because of the way I structure things, I'm asking questions they wouldn't think of. So you get both benefit. And so I presume it's similar with yourself as well.
Very similar. My journey very much sounded the same. It was basically started around 2012, 2013 with Bitcoin, right at about $4 a coin. And at that time, people thought, well, there really isn't anything here. I don't really understand this whole concept. And even as a technical person, to get started back then in 2013 with understanding the different types of cryptography you needed to have, the different type of wallets you need to have. And at that time, everybody was keeping their money on exchanges, right? So Mt. Gox was a great example of, back in, 2013, I think everybody was storing their money. A relatively good majority of people were storing their money in Mt. Gox, which is just an online exchange. And then later part of 2014, they realized that Mt. Gox basically then all of a sudden pulled out. Everybody had zero balances. No one could get to their accounts. And at that time, it was kind of like, the money that you had in there was kind of either exit scammed or hacked or whichever. And I think now there's a class action lawsuit that are now people are still pursuing to try to get some of their coins back. But I think that really kind of shook the kind of the consensus around people to start looking to alternative methods of moving to more of a more safe environment, such as maybe cold storage or offline wallets. And then, of course, you get a little technical with that is because now you start to figure out how can I move coins around from one exchange to a wallet. So the whole journey has just been incredible.
And with because something the way technology is moving so fast with the AI and blockchain and everything, those studying, because whatever they're studying, it's different by the time they qualify. What's the best way for people these days to actually navigate that? Is it that the universities have to have their finger on the pulse and they're updating it every 6 months?
Are you talking about AI education or blockchain or how
Yeah,
people?
yeah, anything to do with tech, basically, because
Mhm.
whoever's involved in even if it's what AWS,
Yeah.
all that stuff, because it's constantly evolving.
That's a huge topic because the technology moves so fast. So you have to really search for some online education to really get plugged into how things work. Even for myself, as someone who is I have a lot of certifications. I still continue to keep up with the community, but it's still moving so fast. What I'm encouraging people to do is to continue to look online, and there are some great online courses, blockchain, artificial intelligence, Web3. There are some great online learning classes out there that you could take where you can consume them at your own convenience. I've noticed that there are some universities like Harvard and MIT have also been offering some classes around AI and blockchain. Those tend to be very expensive. And for people who are kind of into that, hey, I like to kind of get enrolled into this like 6 month course. I want to spend 6 months and go get a Harvard degree around AI or blockchain. But for most people, like everyday people who want to just learn the technology, there are a lot of great alternatives out there to just basically consume the content at a very, very, very low cost and to just become very proficient with it. I think the most thing is, the question is how far, how deep do you want to get into this? Do you want to start building your own blockchain? Do you want to start writing your own language model? And for those people who really want to kind of go very deep with that, there are some courses out there that are probably going to be, it'll probably take them 6 months to a year to get very proficient. And for most people who really just want to become just technically proficient with just being able to have conversations with people in the tech industry, there are some great courses out there that get you to that 100 level, 200 level. So you at least have a foundation of simple terms, the taxonomy, and what things mean, and then how to have engaging discussions with people in the field. And those courses are out there. They're very, very low cost, and they can be consumed at your own convenience. So that's a great thing about it. But the field is moving so fast. Uh, there's a lot of content out there. There's no lack of content, but good content is something that's hard to find. So classes like Blockchain Council, Udemy, those are some good outlets right there for just being able to go out and consume content and consume it at your own convenience at a very low price.
And because, like, what I've noticed is whatever the latest trend is, there's always somebody out there. And unfortunately, there are so many people, they don't know much and they're creating courses and everything.
Mhm.
How would you recommend that somebody how to pick something that's better? Because when somebody is not really at the level, it's very hard for them
Mhm.
to know what's
Mhm.
good. What's the best way to decide where you should invest your money when you're buying,
Mhm.
like, say, an online
Yeah.
course?
Yeah, I think Udemy, Udemy is really great. And the great thing about that is that it has each course is rated by the students. So students actually rate that course. And then as you're looking at the course, you'll see how many people have taken that course. So if you see people, you say, okay, this course is basically X dollars, but you have like maybe 20, 30 people who've rated it. It may not be that great. You have other courses who have maybe 5,000 people who've actually taken the course, and then you start to see the feedback, and you see how it's rated from 1 to 5 stars, 5 being the greatest. It's very transparent in the way that you could see people have taken this course. This is their feedback. This is what they have said about the teacher or the instructor is really, really critical. This is what they say about the course and the instructor. And Udemy is great because it kind of gives you this, like, almost like this Yelp rating review of how people can then go out and rate the course. And people seeing that gives them basically confidence in the course that they're going to buy and enroll in. It is good. And I think you have to go with what others have said about the course, what their own learning experience was like. And if it was a positive learning experience, then they'll go and they'll rate that course for other people who are looking at it to see if, in fact, if it's worthwhile. So I think you have to go with where other people have rated the courses. If you see a course that isn't rated, you don't see any reviews, you don't see where other people who have went through the learning course that have been able to provide feedback, I probably would kind of look at it with a little bit of skepticism. It's kind of like that, trust us, it's good. Well, I'd like to see what others are saying about this course, and if they thought it was good as well. Because as an educator, especially I've taught a lot of online classes. I've done a lot of teaching over my career, and we have things like CSAT scores, and those scores kind of tell us as instructors, as educators, as evangelists, how did this course resonate with my students, or how is this resonating with the audience? And you got to take it with you got to go with the highest rated one, which, if there are many courses out there. So how do you pick the right one? Go with the one that's got the highest rating from the users or from the learners.
Brilliant. Excellent. So with the AI, because it's evolving so fast, and there's so many different ones out there, and I'm now that you're podcasting as well, you're probably looking at all the different ones out there. Like, how do you navigate that field? Because like I get so many different things from people, because I've got a good community of podcasters. And I find that I'm looking at all these different things, or I get a load of AI companies asking me to be beta testing with their stuff, but they just fizzle, and I just find it's actually taking more time than you would think. So, like, is there too many? Is it the Wild West at the moment, and we'll eventually get it down to a few brilliant ones?
Well, I think there's a lot of hype out there, and I think right now we're kind of in a hype cycle. Google, for instance, I think Google has got a language model called Gemini. OpenAI has kind of got their Chat GPT. Amazon's got another one, and Microsoft's got a different one. And these are all really, really great AI and large language models. And there are a lot of other startup companies out there that are developing. I think there's over 117 large language models out there available today. So there's a lot of noise in terms of there's a lot of things that can be classified as AI, a lot of things that can be classified as large language models. And I think if you were to kind of hyper focus and say, listen, what's going to be the most tried and true one, I would probably say that there's a lot of good alternatives out there. But I think in terms of the individual is, you probably want to go with things that have been proven over time, things that have been invested in, right? So one thing that you always want to remain skeptical of is a startup that comes up with an AI that wants to sell it. The next thing you know, the startup is gone, right? So a lot of people invested a lot of money, a lot of VC money into the startup. But I think that, there's a lot of hype right now. There's a lot of noise. So there's a lot of things out there. And I think sometimes the difficulty is trying to drown out the noise and trying to find the right fit for purpose AI model for what you're intending it to do. Or if that's basically interaction with customers, if that's something that you may want to find ways to be more productive, in your everyday, right? So a great example is a friend of mine has a marketing company, and he's now leveraging artificial intelligence to help him with marketing campaigns, help him with calendaring, scheduling, and things like that. And it gives him a way that he can scale his business without having to have 4, 5, 6, 7 employees. And he can leverage artificial intelligence to do kind of offload those tasks to the AI assistant. And those are great examples of how people are leveraging AI in a very safe manner, right? And I say safe in the sense of, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and OpenAI, they all have relatively good safeguards and good frameworks around their AIs and large language models. So I think if you were looking to put your trust in something, that probably has been tested, tried and true, and has wider adoption with more people as they're coming onto the platform.
I have seen that AI lies, and there was times it's kind of like doing a Google search. It depends on the question you ask as well. You ask something and it's giving you an answer. And unfortunately, I mean, I know there are clients of yours you've worked from and everything, but this from a side of, there's a lot of people that have been hurt from this, because I understand where there's times they need to hide this. If someone's asking how to create something that's going to be dangerous or do something bad, but there's
Mhm.
people that have holistic information. There's doctors and stuff like that, natural remedies. They're all
Mhm.
being shut down. Their website's been taken down, and they push all the, like, there's so much toxic stuff out there, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, they're writing this, and a
Mhm.
lot of people are putting their trust in that. And I'd like your thoughts on that one.
Well, there's definitely so going into the AI topic is the framework and the biases that are built into it, right? I think that as entities like Microsoft and Google and some of the bigger entities that are basically creating AI at scale, there are of course biases that are built into AI. So for a perfect example is that you can't go into ChatGPT and you can't say, can you write me instructions on how I can create something that would probably cause harm to other people, right? The system is already basically pre-built and pre-trained with a set of parameters that it would not give you an idea. How would I be able to do something? And again, it's thinking about it's already got a bias. It's already got a bias framework built into it. Um, you can't ask it something in order to deceive other people. Now, those are the language models and those are the AI models that are existing today. You want them to have biases. You want them to have guardrails and a proper framework built into it. And in the US, they're starting to build kind of what they consider to be an ethical framework for AI. So you start to see companies, large companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM, and many others out there. What they're looking to do is they're looking to build an AI framework that is ethical compliance and regulatory built into it. So when companies are looking to engage with an AI entity, is that they know that the AI entity is complying with a regulatory or at least some sort of governed framework that prevents it from doing wild and crazy things. I'll give you an example. So you heard about the Air Canada incident, right? The Air Canada incident where they had an AI chatbot that was interacting with a customer, and the customer was complaining to the AI chatbot, and then the AI model and the AI chatbot basically said, okay, fine, we'll give you a full refund. Well, that was in violation of Air Canada's policies. And what happened was is that passenger ended up suing Air Canada for a substantial amount of money. And that was just a mistake, that they should not have been putting an AI chatbot that is customer facing when it comes to answering questions about things like refunds. Well, that got a little bit crazy. That got some news attention where they had to go to court, and the Air Canada eventually lost. But now you're starting to see where companies and individuals are starting to say is there is a limitation of where we're willing to put AI. And sometimes that means that we're going to put a limit on its interaction with the open public. So we may not have it be completely opening to, people out, and, that they have to let them know that they're basically interacting with a chatbot or an AI bot. So there are some frameworks that are being put in place now to protect people from rogue malicious bots and things like that. But I think the idea is that the the industry as a whole wants to adopt a framework that gives the AI an ethical framework for where it's going to basically kind of guide. And people, once they start to see more of that happening, they'll put more and more trust into the platform.
So with the cloud, AWS and there's a lot of different ones out there.
Mhm.
Like we mentioned earlier about Mount Gox. The
Mhm.
reality is they have everything. And if they decide to turn the tap off in the morning, are you risking should you have a backup yourself for everything you're
Mhm.
doing?
When it comes to things like cryptocurrency or
Not just cryptocurrency, but anything you're doing, because a lot of businesses, they rely solely on, the AWS and just
Mhm.
everything that's doing it. And I mean, it's massive storage, but
Mhm.
the reality is, if they decide, hey, let's turn off the tap, or something
Mhm.
happens, your kind of whole business can kind of fail overnight. And I'm just wondering what way you should actually have systems in place to,
Yeah.
I mean, the chances are very
Yeah.
slim, but just to
Yeah.
be protected.
What I've seen before is that customers will probably, and most likely this, they'll go, multi-cloud. They'll go into where they'll basically put some in Amazon, they'll put some in Microsoft, they'll put some in Google. They will have what they want to reduce their blast radius. So if, let's say, for example, Amazon had an outage and it lasted for days, most customers are probably wanting to say, listen, to prevent that from happening to us is that, we want to spread our environments around. We want to be able to spread our information around to one or two or three or four different type of entities. So we don't have an incident where if something happens with Amazon, oh, well, no big deal. We just flip the switch and we now have our capabilities running somewhere else. And I think that in the early part of the cloud, you started to see customers who would go all in on one particular one entity, right? They'd all go in all in with Amazon or AWS. Now you're starting to see customers realize is that if there's an outage or if there's something that happens, we want to make sure that we've got a plan B or plan C. And that plan B, plan C is to kind of make sure that we've got our environment sprinkled around to a couple different places to reduce our blast radius, or to make sure that if something happens, we are not completely shut down, we're not completely powerless. Now, that's for customers. You think about individuals who use like Amazon Drive or things like that is, it's always best to at least have your backup in one or two or three different locations, specifically to prevent just that, just to make sure that, it doesn't happen. I think a scary example of that was just, what was it, about 2 weeks ago when Coinbase had this huge surge, right? This huge surge with crypto. And then Coinbase customers started reporting on Twitter that their accounts were showing zero. If I'm holding all my cryptocurrency in Coinbase, that's a very scary thing. But just like kind of the concept is, you want to spread the wealth around a little bit. You want to make sure you don't have one single point of failure. I think you got to take that same approach, whether you're an enterprise customer or an individual, is you want to reduce that single point of failure.
And like with all the big boys, are they all using similar technologies, or is one way ahead of the crowd with the way they're doing it?
I think that they all are pretty much on par. I think there's different elements of innovation that Microsoft has, that Google has, that Amazon Web Services has. But the difference is the ecosystem. The ecosystem has different options. They all basically operate at scale. They have millions and millions of customers. Relatively, the ecosystem, they say, well, it's not apples to apples comparisons. Sometimes it's apples to orange comparisons. Microsoft has a very rich ecosystem of products and services that mostly are driven by Microsoft. Amazon has a lot of the same types of offerings as well. I think in terms of the ecosystem, AWS is by far the largest. It's 57%. It's large, 57% larger than all other cloud providers combined. But Microsoft is definitely gaining in the cloud space. Google is a little bit smaller there. So you have some industry leaders, like Amazon Web Services, and then you have emerging leaders like Microsoft Azure. And again, as you're starting to see more and more adoption of AI and the ecosystem, is that the customers will want to go where the technology has been proven across more with other customers as well too. So your two biggest ones, of course, are Google, are Microsoft, Amazon, and of course back then, merging is also Google Cloud as well too. And there are different use cases for different customers if they want to use one versus the other. Sometimes they have a compelling event that would drive them more towards one than the other. But I think overall is that the ecosystems are pretty much, I wouldn't say apples to apples, they're apples to orange comparisons.
Okay. And like with the mining, we've heard, especially with the Bitcoin, depending on, like I heard so much corruption and lies with, say, the climate thing, but irrespective of that, I know there's some places with the energy, but if you look at the mine, not just the mining, but a lot of these data centers, like they're massive amounts of energy that's required for them for the cooling and everything. So like these are the people that are running these companies that are flying to Davos and they're telling people, don't drive your car or kill your cow because he's farting. Like, but just like what energy consumptions be using, and are they actually looking at ways of kind of reducing that?
Yeah, sustainability is a huge topic. And I know it's been one that they've been baking into their plan over the last, 5 years, at least for the last 5+ years, is the idea around kind of having sustainability built into everything they do. So that's basically lower, CO2 emissions, ESG scores, trying to abide by the Paris Climate Accord. I think it was, probably about 2020. They wanted to get to a certain level of emissions. And of course, building data centers, it all still puts out carbon emissions and things like that. So while we think about, kind of clean energy, it's interesting is that, they're also trying to find ways to have more efficient power and cooling that has less of an output into the carbon, and reduces their carbon footprint. And this is something that every single miner, every single organization is built into their whole strategy around when you build a physical plant, a physical location that you have to fill with computing power. And that computing power, of course, is going to put off an excessive amount of energy. How do we still do this with a balance around being ESG friendly, having our CO2 or our carbon footprint being very, very lower? That's a very hard thing to balance. But what you're seeing in the US is that you're starting to see entities like TerraWolf. TerraWolf is a great example of how they're now starting to leverage things like nuclear energy, very clean nuclear energy to basically help, basically provide power to their Bitcoin mining plants. And you start to see where now states are doing things with nuclear energy, with hydroelectric dams. They're trying to find cleaner ways to be able to provide power to these mining entities. And now in the United States is that you have states like Nebraska, Texas, Kentucky. I think you have probably almost 10 states now that are basically saying, hey, we would love to have Bitcoin mining in our state. We have lots of power, and we would love to be able to have you invest your company in our state. So there's a lot of state credits, a lot of tax credits that they can take advantage of to lure those in. So they're now starting to become very competitive. I think Texas and New York and the United States are by far the biggest in terms of the number of miners that are there in their state. But now it's getting to be very competitive where now the states are asking them to come into their state. We'll provide you with energy credits. So it's interesting to see. We'll see what the next 5 years happens, like see what will happen over the next 5 years. But it's very interesting to see that there's now so much more adoption from the states to have mining companies come in and actually build facilities there.
Oh, yeah, interesting. And with like Bitcoin, I think it's around 72,000 today, which it's and Ethereum's about 4K. Where do you see the markets going for them? And also, I like to know who you think created Bitcoin.
Oh, wow, that's a good question. So I'll answer the first part. I'll answer the first part of like who is Satoshi Nakamoto, right? I don't know who he is, or who he or she or they are. That's a question that I've always grappled with. There's a lot of people who've come out to say that they are Satoshi Nakamoto. I think there's currently a case going on in the UK right now where I think there's an individual who's been claiming that he's Satoshi Nakamoto. And I think it's interesting. We don't know. That's a very interesting thing. It could be a person who doesn't exist anymore. I think if you look on chain, Satoshi's wallet is probably by far the largest, with probably almost 40%. I think somewhere around there is probably the largest Bitcoin holder. I think he's got about 10 million coins, something crazy like that. But if you look on chain, that money hasn't moved. I would think if Satoshi was a real person, that money probably would have been moved, or likely not. But to the next question is, I'm not sure who Satoshi is, but what he released into the world was something very fascinating, and has since 2008 has started to see a huge shift in the way that we started to look at financial institutions. Again, you mentioned that Bitcoin basically hit over 72K, right? Its price point. I think people are even saying now, even before the Bitcoin halving, is that we're looking at probably expected numbers around 120, 130,000. That's incredible to see something that's relatively less than 10 years old grow in such popularity that now you have almost 24% of US population now looking to acquire Bitcoin in some capacity. And I think that you start to see now that you have 110 ETFs that the SEC has approved, and now more mainstream adoption into these big financial institutions, where before they would say Bitcoin is absolutely not going to be something we offer. It's a scam. It's something only for criminals and the underworld and things like that. But now you start to see Grayscale and BlackRock and Fidelity, and you get these large financial institutions that manage a massive amount of wealth, all now looking to add Bitcoin into their portfolio. So now you get structural adoption into that as well too. I think that's kind of a very, very, it's interesting to see, because if you were to ask me 10 years ago, where do you see Bitcoin? I probably never would have, nobody probably would have foresaw it going where it is now. And I think that's very surprising to see. So yeah.
with, you mentioned Fidelity, BlackRock and Vanguard. There was a guy who actually investigated all of them. They all own shares in each other. There's only a tiny percentage is actually the population. There's a small percentage, there's the shareholder, Larry Finks, and etc. So, I mean, if you look at the Fed, the printing press and everything, is the whole lot hype that they can just pull the plug on it the way that they have control of so much finances? That's my fear.
Well, I think the idea is that Bitcoin is definitely a hedge against inflation, right? It's a place where people are going because, again, with the U.S. government continually printing money over and over again, is that essentially that is passed off in the form of a tax. We just don't call it a tax; we call it inflation. But most people are looking at, the value of the dollar, the value of their other savings is going down. Bitcoin is the refuge for where they can then go seek a refuge from these other institutions where they say, hey, listen, a good percentage of your wealth is going to be taken away. Whatever you saved is going to be taken away due to inflation. Well, Bitcoin is now emerging second to silver. And I think that people are saying is that it's even better than gold because you can always mine and produce more gold. But Bitcoin's beauty is that it's capped at 21 million and we're now at 19 million. So it's a very scarce type of material that people are now looking to invest into. So I think you start to see a lot of people now rushing, and I think this is kind of the FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. People now rushing to try to get some, where I think now is that it's much easier because now you can go into your Fidelity, Vanguard, BlackRock, is that you'll then be able to, just like with Fidelity, just go into your Fidelity account and then have Fidelity issue you your Bitcoin and they can be the custodian of that Bitcoin. Whereas before is if you didn't have these mainstream type of adoptions with these mainstream financial institutions, you would have to try to find an exchange somewhere. You have to find some way to connect your bank to it. You have to find, and then of course, if your bank even approves that you even purchase Bitcoin, where I remember many years ago would be is that your bank would almost undeniably say, sorry, you're not investing in crypto. We're just going to decline the transaction. So now you start to see, okay, now this is starting to get mainstream and you can connect your bank. You can transfer almost as little or all your money into this account, and then you can then purchase your money on an exchange, or you can do it through your Fidelity account, which I think now they're starting to see more mainstream adoption. I think that gives more people more certainty that now Fidelity, BlackRock are getting into the market. They can bring their investment customers with them as well. So it gives them a whole different avenue where they didn't have before 5 years ago. How would you buy crypto 5 years ago? Well, you had to go out to a specific exchange. It was very complicated. So now it's much easier to get into the game. And these institutions are making it much easier, but there's also a profit margin to that as well, too. So it's interesting to see.
And with the halving, because I've seen like a graph showing, like a circular kind of sphere kind of thing, showing the way every time it halved, it increased so much. Could you explain to those listening what halving is and how often it happens and will it keep happening?
Yeah, so basically the halving event is every 4 years. They basically they reduce the reward to the miners by about 50%. And then what that basically means is the miners can only sell 900 Bitcoins per day right now. Then they're only going to be able to sell 450 Bitcoins a day at the end of April. So every 4 years, it goes through this correlation where the miners and the reward starts to get smaller and smaller. So they halve the reward to the miners, right? And then really that just basically means, so as long as there's more demand in the market, it's basically going to see this drive an adoption. But that's basically means that they're going to simply say, listen, the system has a way of self-correcting itself so there's not too much supply happening. And then every 4 years is when that happens, right? So that's a very beautiful thing about the system is that it simply halves the reward to the miners by 50%. So yeah, the block size can only be so big. So that's just kind of in essence, kind of what the halving event really means. And I think the last time that we had the halving, I think Bitcoin was right around 16,000. And then when they hit the halving, I think it would really kind of started taking a plunge here. But now interesting is that we're starting to see Bitcoin go from 60 to 70, almost now to 80,000. And we're doing this before the halving. And I think what people learned from the last halving that we had 4 years ago is that when people had their money in Bitcoin and they started hitting halving, I think they panicked. And I think they sold everything they had, which is why you started to see that huge drop in the Bitcoin price. I think now as we're going into this halving coming up in April, as people are buying Bitcoin and they're going to hold on to it and they're going to ride this next halving out because they're saying, I'm in it for the long run.
Brilliant. I mean, you're not going to store your money or use the exchange of Mt. Gox, but what exchange would you recommend, and what wallet do you think is the best one?
Oh, that's a good question. Trezor wallets. So wallets. I think having an offline wallet's great. There's a couple of them options out there. There's the Trezor wallet. Um, so I always encourage people to look at offline wallets, the ones that you can basically plug into your computer USB. There's a Jade wallet as well. I think, having anything that's basically got a multi-sig capability, that's brilliant. In terms of exchanges, Coinbase, Kraken, they're great exchanges, but I don't keep my money on exchanges. If I need to do anything with Bitcoin, or if I need to do anything where I need to transact or trade, I conduct my trade and then I immediately move everything I have basically offline. A little lesson from Mt. Gox, right? Perfect example with Coinbase 2 weeks ago, where people started getting zero balances, and it was just simply an accounting error on Coinbase's side, but still very scary if you have multiple customers, or you have thousands of customers who have millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, or even if you have $2,000 worth of Bitcoin, you don't want to see that you balance is zero. So I like to use a couple of different offline wallets. Trezor wallet's one of them, and that's probably one of the tried and true wallets, is anything that's got open source software to it. And I say that because most people are saying, well, why is it important? It's important because if there's a backdoor to any offline wallet, the community is going to find out, and they're going to publish that finding. They're going to say, hey, we looked at the open source software. It's got a backdoor built into it. So if you're storing your currency or storing your coins on this wallet that has a backdoor to it, that's probably not going to be very appealing for most people. They want to keep their coins and keep them secure, and they want to use something like multi-sig. So looking at wallets that are open source is really it's really great for customers to have, because it gives them trust that the community's looked at it, we vetted it, and if there's something funny going on about it, we can at least announce it to the wider community that we found a vulnerability, we found a backdoor, and that prevents people from basically losing their coins.
And you mentioned the community, because there's so many different kind of social media platforms out there, even Telegram groups and everything. But like I know, like with the crypto, Twitter kind of seems to take off, but Reddit is. So which are the better ones to go? Because like what I find is that with a lot of these social media, they kind of reward negativity, unfortunately.
Mhm.
But just for like the blockchain world and stuff like that, which ones
Mhm.
which ones do you find are the better ones?
Well, I find that most of the people, who are in the open source community typically tend to be more vocal on Twitter. Reddit's also another great one. But I think now what you're starting to see now is, I think what you're starting to see is independent, news sites like decrypt, decrypt.co, which is a website, TechCrunch, Wired. Most of the reporters who are reporting on things such as crypto, Bitcoin, blockchain, they tend to be really good at basically paying attention. So let's say, for example, you're an individual. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Reddit. I don't know how to read. I don't know how to read Substack or whatever. A lot of these and I'll say some of these outlets, such as like decrypt.co, is a great single source of truth that you can go to say if there's vulnerabilities that happened. You've got great content writers that are looking at the technical aspects of what's happening with crypto and blockchain and AI, and they're great about evangelizing that in terms of a story that's easily able to consume and digest. Because again, people who've been on Reddit and Substack and then all these other different threads, you've really got to know kind of really what you're doing in terms of being able to read it. But if you're the normal everyday user of Bitcoin and crypto, and you're not on any of these things, I would say look for news articles from TechCrunch or from Wired or from decrypt.co. They're great at being able to tell you what's happening with a larger community, and then summarize that in a way that most people can understand and they can consume that content without having to dive deep into. And again, there's a lot of Twitter trolls out there. There's a lot of misinformation. So I like to say, you can look at, Paul Barron's network. He's great out there. He's out there on YouTube. He's got a great show. I always say I like to tune into his show. He's always great at being able to tell people the latest and greatest news almost every day. Scott Melker is another great one. There's a lot of good people in the community who are evangelizing for good, and that's great to hear now. Whereas before, it was all scams, pump and dumps, exit scams, everything was a scam. But I think now you get more certainty, more stability with more of these outspoken people like Paul Barron, Michael Saylor, Scott Melker. These people are great at kind of telling you what's going on. and the community as a whole tends to now be more supportive of more trust, more transparency, because that's, if you have bad actors, the system has a way of correcting it out. But these people tend to be more of a voice for good. So that's who I kind of tend to put more of my trust into. When they come out and say something that is alarming that we should be paying attention to, that's probably when people should start taking action, such as if there's a vulnerability, if there's a recent hack, if there's something that's happening with a particular platform, here's what it means to people, and here's probably what they would probably advise them to do. And these are people that are out on YouTube, great people, very trustworthy. They've got a great audience. So I would say people just need to tune into that.
Excellent. And just finally, because they kind of tell us what they're going to do, but when you look at the AI, the cloud, and blockchain, and cyber attacks, like, is it something, because there's been a few outages and a few kind of strange things happening, but they've been telling us this is going to happen. What's your thoughts on cyber attacks?
It's happening more and more. And I think people need to become more conscious of, with the explosion of artificial intelligence, is that now you have bad actors, and that gives them full range capability to embrace AI. So they can reverse that, and they can use AI to do more cyber attacking. Now, that's going to basically be a true statement, is that they're going to leverage artificial intelligence to do more things maliciously. Where customers and where companies need to get really savvy is around building a strategy around cybersecurity that leverages things like artificial intelligence, threat intelligence, and being able to do things such as data correlation, and anomaly detection, and leveraging AI at the front to be able to look at cybersecurity incidents. So now you can even leverage artificial intelligence at the front end and at the edge. And what it's going to do is it needs to start looking at things such as anomaly detection to determine if another AI is trying to hack, or another AI entity is interacting with another AI entity, and getting that level of intelligence to be able to understand what to do without involving humans, right? So you kind of think of this perfect world where companies have AI deployed at the cybersecurity level, right? And there's basically kind of this AI entity that is looking at the different things that are happening to see if this is a wider attack, or if this is just someone particularly trying to do things such as like distributed denial of service attack on me. I think companies and people need to kind of be aware is that cybersecurities are going to intensify. It's going to get larger, and we just need to have an entity, or we need to have a strategy around how to embrace artificial intelligence that leverages cybersecurity capabilities that protects our data. So my bank, for example, my healthcare information, you want to have these institutions leverage more artificial intelligence with cybersecurity, and that will then be able to start to look at how we can then reduce the noise for cybersecurity attacks. Again, it's not something that's going to stop. It's going to keep intensifying. I think we just have to be a little bit smarter about how we increase that security posture, so we protect our customers. So my bank, my healthcare institutions, all of them, I want to basically ask them, can you increase your security posture, leveraging more things like blockchain, artificial intelligence? And that's what we should ask for as consumers and customers, is to have more trust and faith in our institutions, is that they're doing the best that they can and being able to mitigate things such as data leakage, data hacks, and leakage of personal information, PII, and things like that. So as a customer and as an individual, that's what I would advocate my institutions to do, is to be more sophisticated when it comes to what can they do to futurize their cybersecurity stance and their posture.
Excellent. Listen, thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, Stephen. You might let people know where they can find you.
Yep, you can find me on Twitter at The Tech Travels, and you can also find me on LinkedIn under Steve Woodard.
Brilliant. And I'll make sure I'll also put the link to your podcast as well. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ryan. Absolutely. Enjoy the conversation.
Right. Cheers. So that's all for the Crypto Podcast. You'll find all our episodes on thecryptopodcast.org. Until next week, take care. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and share with your friends. And you'll find all my shows with the QR code or bio.link/podcaster, as well as my podcast coaching. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, DanielPacker.com, helping people with anxiety, stress, and addictions. He's got a 90% success rate, and you only pay if you're successful. Also, if you'd like to go on a podcasting tour, I can help you do that. And if you're interested in sponsorship, you can contact me on my bio.link/podcaster. Until next week, take care.